And we are starting with session 2 on road pricing. Where do we go from here? Allow me to introduce to you the moderator of this session today, a dear friend, a professional that is very well known to the sector. Welcome, Cesar Queiroz. He's a roads and transport infrastructure consultant. He's also former World Bank Highways advisor. I think Cesar doesn't need any introduction at all. You've been in the sector for a while, and it's always a pleasure to have you on board. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation. I'll pass you the floor to moderate the session, and we are here to assist if you need anything. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Really appreciate Susanna. It's a pleasure to join you and all the colleagues for this nice session. We have two speakers, Ansgar Kauf, friend for many years, and Norbert Schindler, whom I think we first met about 10 years ago in a conference in Warsaw. So welcome our two speakers. And if you don't mind, Susan, I'll take the liberty to show a few slides as an introductory remark, because I think the two presentations, as we're going to see, are very high-tech and very informative, but focused mostly on electronic toll collection and the related subject. So a broader overview would help set the context. So, and I'm asking Agostina if she could help, please, road pricing. So road pricing, that is in our title of our session, is sometimes we think about so many terminology and definitions that I thought would be good to find at least one definition of road pricing that could help us to understand the whole context. So road pricing, according to the U.S. Federal Highway Administration, involves direct charge for use of roads, including tolls, vehicle miles traveled. Okay, that's here in the U.S. So internationally, it would be vehicle kilometers traveled, VKT, fees, and congestion pricing. And next. So I think in a general way, we could say that source of funding for roads include, there may be others, but I tried to be as comprehensive as I could here. Certainly it's not exhaustive, like fuel taxes, vehicle license, road usage fees, which is what we mentioned before, payment by the distance driven, kilometers or miles, tolls, vignettes, charges on non-standard vehicles, new vehicle purchase tax, sales taxes, and ultimately the budget. The public budget in a country is the main source of financing roads in many countries. Next. So ultimately, I would say that the source of funding, there are two sources of funding for roads: the road users and the taxpayers. We can say fuel levy, fuel fees, fuel excise tax, whatever we say, ultimately there are two sources of funding: the road users and the taxpayers. And next. So in terms of international practice, I would summarize that traditionally fuel taxes have represented 70 to 80% of the total road user charge, but it has been declining in many countries. Now, as you adopt more electric vehicles, for example, there is a substantial reduction in tax generated by fuel. Transit fees for foreign vehicles have been used in some countries to compensate for the local fees that they do not otherwise pay. Urban congestion charges have been adopted in several cities in Norway, for example, in Oslo, other cities in London, Singapore, Stockholm, and there has been widespread use of electronic toll collection, an area that Ansgar and Norbert will explore further. Next, please. I would like to finish with a reflection. And I took this picture quite a few years ago. In fact, it was my first mission to West Africa more than 3 decades ago. And this one man, he calls himself one-man contractor, and he patches potholes using some sand and dirt. He patched potholes, and he's funded, not by the road administration. He has nothing to do with the road administration. He's funded by the users, drivers, truck drivers, bus drivers, or drivers in general, even bus passengers throw him some money as they pass. Now they know that the benefit they are getting from a road with fewer potholes would be great, and this man then can maintain his family. He told me he even sends his kids to school with the revenues that he gets from road users. So from this very rudimentary and simple context, I believe that we can conclude that provided that there are benefits to the users are willing to pay. And the willingness to pay is essential to what we're going to hear from Ansgar and from Norbert. Next, please. Oh, thanks very much. And I would appreciate then if Ansgar could give his presentation, then we go to Norbert. So Ansgar Kauf, a senior expert with innovative mobility, Geneva, has a broad experience in working on mobility in the transport sector, and both with the private sector and with the public sector. So, Ansgar, the floor is yours, please.
Yeah. Yes, hello. Many thanks for inviting me. I just tried to share the screen. Does it work?
Yes, I can see here.
Very good. Very good. Yeah. So I'm less technical than Norbert because, Cesar, you said we are high-tech presenters. So I approached the question of the generalization of toll systems, of road user charges in Europe, a bit from the Swiss perspective, but it's not possible anymore in this globalized world, also in Europe, to present countries and to look at them in an isolated manner. So as Cesar mentioned already, we currently face a big challenge in the road sector, the erosion of tax-based road financing. In Europe, I think also in other parts of the world. Is the way forward paved by satellite-based tolls, GNSS truck tolls? That's our hypothesis. I will then present the Swiss case study because the Swiss government has announced road user charges for electric vehicles. The question is what will happen in the European Union. I will also mention a few urban charging projects, mobility pricing in Switzerland, and then we can talk about the challenges and you can make your questions. So I directly pass to the European overview. Fuel taxes as the traditional source of road funding is eroding in Europe. Let's have a look at the numbers. You can check the budgets. There is also the recent study by ITF, International Transport Forum, Decarbonization and Pricing of Road Transport. So initially, road taxes represented 10% of national budgets, which is quite a lot. And more than 50% of road taxes were siphoned off, used for other purposes. This huge portion of income has declined to 4.4% until 2020. It's further declining. More declines are expected, even a third by 2023-24, and even 90% in 2050, according to the UK Parliament. You know the reasons, as Cesar already has mentioned. Until now, it was mainly fuel economies by internal combustion engine powered vehicles. And it's interesting to see there is already a considerable loss in tax income. And now the breakthrough of electric vehicles is imminent, and this will cause a much larger erosion because electric vehicles are paying only a fraction of the taxes paid by petrol and diesel powered cars. we should not forget, therefore I'm not just technical, the link of road user charges to, for example, concession networks. We have lots of, in the southwest and southeast of Europe, entire toll motorway concession network with toll. And of course, there are a number of toll-free countries. So this is a very old cartoon, which I think Cesar knows well. This comes from Latin America. I just put English titles on top because this was about road user funds. This was the World Bank approach in Latin America. More than 50% of tax income is siphoned off because there is the principle of non-dedication of taxes. This is generally applied. Finance ministers, they have lots of other concerns, and only 50% or less are reinvested in the sector. Now, there is additional pressure because we have the climate change debate, decarbonization. So if there are new road user charges, they serve the purpose of decarbonizing. And once again, we should not forget that finance ministers have huge financial needs, which is currently not seen. I will shortly present now the Swiss case. The numbers are a bit similar. In Switzerland, we have a decline between 2008, the highest revenues of 5.2 billion to a bit more than 4 billion, 4.16, nearly 20%. Part of it was COVID induced, but now with the breakthrough of electric vehicles, we approach 20-25%, and now as there is a big erosion coming. The reasons are the same as in Europe, which we have presented. I will not repeat. And in Switzerland, we have an exceptional situation. The road budget is still having a little surplus, but now is going to a deficit. Let's have a look at the European situation. I will shortly present a map. Norbert will go into much more detail. I will present now toll road networks in Europe. It's a patchwork, as you can see on this colored map. You see the blue, the countries in blue, which have toll road networks. You can say it's like a diagonal line from it's going down from the northwest to the southeast. It's nearly a 45 degrees line. Certain countries, nevertheless, like Spain, you can see it is in light blue because they have the concessions have run out. And other countries, like in the center of Europe, Germany, other countries don't have concession networks, toll concession networks. In Eastern Europe, it's a bit different. But we see, since there was the introduction of the Eurovet vignette directive in 1999, you have truck tolls, which are a very coherent approach, much more coherent than for cars. You have interoperable systems, and you have even services. It's like a roaming service, a truck. This is the EETS, European Electronic Toll Service. And there's a trend. This is just something which Norbert will present, so I will click through it. There are already 8 countries having satellite-based tolls for trucks on entire networks, and another 4 countries are coming. You see the technology. I don't go into the details. The big revolution of tolling is coming now, thanks to satellite-based tolls. And just to give you an impression, this is the implementation status of the European Electronic Toll Service for trucks. It's a much more coherent map. And you can also see that there are 18 EETS providers. I think it's even growing. So there is something very coherent and a strong trend in the truck sector. The question is, will it come? Probably in the car sector, but when? Just a quick view on the European toll road map. This is another view. It looks coherent because a lot of the countries are in red, but there are all kinds of solutions. You have toll-free highways, toll gates, manual, vignette solutions, certain bridges, tunnels. And we don't have nationwide satellite GNSS systems. There is no EETS for cars, no European Electronic Toll Service, but there are nationwide tolling systems in preparation. In Switzerland, Netherlands, Ireland was studying it, and a lot of technology still. So it's much more a patchwork. The question is, will GNSS technology, satellite technology, kilometer-based tolls unify the tolling of vehicles for all the light vehicles? I pass to the Swiss case study. Switzerland has since 2001 truck toll. There are already 2 phases. It's called LSVA, RPLP in French, 1 and 2. And we just had the tender. So the trucks have to pay a fixed rate according to the vehicle categories and axle and weight, and on all the whole road network. And we just had now the new system tender, which was attributed. It's now digitalized. It will be satellite-based tolling. We are still waiting for the project to be, it's in litigation, as the tender had been attributed, competitors litigated. It was expected for the 1st of January 2024. It will be delayed, but this is coming. And this is maybe a little overview. You see, this is also what Norbert will, you have the satellite. It's not only GPS, it's GNSS. I just copied the official picture from the Swiss studies. You have the satellite with mobile internet, and it's satellite it's kilometer based. The satellite positions the truck. It has onboard units, and you have control of infrastructure, ANPR, video license plate reading. Now, as this is a very solid technology, and the Swiss government has already announced shortly before the truck tender came out, they want to launch RUC, road user charges, for cars. The justification, of course, the drop in gas taxes. First, it was interesting, the government, in a study, they even considered to switch to RUC for all cars, but it's not possible because there is on the one hand, there is an agreement. Even the automobile clubs and the conservative parties, which are traditionally against tolling for cars, they agree if you abolish fuel tax. But if you abolish fuel tax in Switzerland, the risk is to have fuel tourism. Then drivers will come over from France, Italy, Germany, and Austria, neighbor countries. So therefore the government said, we cannot abolish fuel tax, but we start to impose it for EVs. It will be a compensation part, a compensation charge, kilometer-based. It should be the equivalent of fuel taxes. End of this year, we have already the law will be presented to the parliament. Latest, it will be launched in 2030. But these are only indicative dates, because I think the whole evolution depends on what's going on in Switzerland. Will the breakthrough and fuel tax erosion be very painful? What's going on in European neighbor countries? The technology is officially not yet decided, but there is only one option. It's very likely to have GNSS tolling combined with GSM networks. How to calculate now the compensation? Here you can see the government took several vehicle categories. Here, for example, are 2 petrol cars. You have an SUV, which is consuming 8 liters per 100. There is a car, a normal passenger car, 5 liters. You can see the tax per year if they drive 15,000 kilometers. One is a bit more than 900, the other nearly 600. Whereas electric vehicles are paying nearly no tax, only 7.7% of VAT on electricity. And as they use only half or a quarter of the energy, it's nearly no fiscal charge for electric vehicles. The plan is now, so how to convert the amount of fuel taxes which normal cars pay. The Swiss have already drafted a conversion table. You see, you have different types of electric vehicles. Even 15 kilowatt, that's nothing, up to 300 kilowatt. And there's a reference case. There's the 116 kilowatt electric vehicle. It would pay a tariff of 5.6 cents per kilometer. So this is the vehicle here in the middle. And so things are already prepared. The question was, initially the government was considering, can we have a big bang? So it would mean to introduce road user charges for all cars, electric, petrol, diesel on all roads, but it's not possible because if you abolish mineral oil taxes, fuel tax in Switzerland, the neighbors will come. And as long as European neighbors have not done it, the government has only to start, and that's the right picture. They go for a gradual transition. Only electric vehicles will be charged. Mineral oil taxes, fuel taxes will further erode. We have the vehicle ban, petrol and diesel cars in Europe 2035, but we don't know. Maybe things will come earlier. And the technology, it's not, I don't go too much into the details. GNSS, satellite-based tolling combined with mobile networks, GSM. Interestingly, the new national truck toll, which will latest start maybe second half of 2024, is already the pilot project. If the GNSS GSM tolling system works, you can more or less extend it to cars. The recording devices, it means instead of having a transponder in the vehicle, you can have an onboard unit, a vehicle-mounted device. There is the option that users who have smartphones, they use the GNSS chipset of their smartphone, the mobile network. But there is a challenge. Is it reliable? Yeah? If mobile phones break down, you can use the vehicle onboard computers, particularly for electric vehicles, very performing. But the car manufacturers don't agree yet, the majority. And finally, there's I made a mistake. I shouldn't have put EATS under recording devices. This is a separate point. There is the question, will be there a European electronic tolling service? It's in discussion, but it's not yet developed for cars. So this is more or less accepted. And in parallel, the Swiss government said we nevertheless have the big problem in urban areas, in agglomerations, the challenge of urban congestion. There is particularly in Geneva, you see on the map here, this is the western edge of Switzerland. We have the red lantern in terms of congestion in the city center. So there are other cities, but interestingly, not all the congested cities are chosen for pilot projects. The government between 2016 and 2019 invited interested cities and cantons. Cantons are the member states of Switzerland to propose pilot projects. Finally, 7 cantons, 7 states, plus 4 cities have proposed projects. 4 have been chosen for road. It's called mobility pricing. Sometimes, mainly it's congestion charging for cars, partly combined with public transport, and there's one rail project. And we are currently, the projects are in the feasibility study phase. So in November, the feasibility studies are being finalized. Next year, 2025, it will be discussed. The decision makers have to decide, are they going for the projects? Because for urban congestion charging, it's much more difficult to launch projects because public resistance is higher. It's simply because you have peak hour charges, which are contentious. There are, for example, even socialists who are usually in favor of tolling. They say it's maybe too expensive. But even in this area, it's very interesting. The Automobile Club who said, no way, we will not accept congestion pricing. Just 2 weeks ago, there was one of the regional presidents of the Swiss Touring Club, and he said, I think it's coming. So it's very interesting that even in politically difficult areas like congestion charging with peak hour tariffs, things are evolving, and it's quite possible it will come. So this is once again the map. You see 4 projects. This is a combined project, 2 cantons. So we have, for the time being, cordon pricing projects in Geneva, Bienne here, and in Frauenfeld. So it's video tolling with NPR proposed, but we have already proposed. We said, why don't you consider satellite-based tolling? Because the pilot projects, maybe they will not come before 2026. So the technology will have so much evolved. Satellite-based tolling we have already pilot projects in Europe. And if progress is achieved, I think there's a big likelihood that even the video tolling projects will be changed for these candidates. To wrap it up, so there are a few challenges. RAC for electric vehicles and cars is accepted, but there's an acceptability problem for urban charging, peak hour charges, and secondly, you have several options if you go for satellite-based tolling. Norbert will, I think, talk about it. I will not go into the details, but the sensitive issue for cars, which we don't have for trucks, there's an agreement with vehicle manufacturers, OEMs, and personal data protection is a bit headache because it's not for the time being accepted in Switzerland to communicate the position data. So maybe it has to be encrypted. It will be a step-by-step approach, but it's possible because the government is careful. They don't announce too much. If things move quicker, so it's like salami tactics. If you want to have the whole sausage, cut it slice by slice. The first slice is decided. Maybe the other slices, tolls, road user charges for diesel and petrol engines will even come quicker. Everything depends on the development. And you may remember when with the introduction of mobile phones in the beginning, I think beginning of the 90s, not many people thought mobile phones will have a breakthrough, and then it came in a sudden. Yeah. So there is the big challenge of European harmonization. And to conclude, there are other big issues, what to do with existing hybrid concessions with PPPs, particularly for the concession networks in the, you can say it's the southwest of Europe, southeast. For example, in France, in Spain, the country has shot itself into the foot because they didn't extend the concessions, but you have it in France, in Italy, in Portugal. And you cannot just impose road user charges as a tax because the concessionaires insists on having their toll, which is a price. It's a different concept. So, and this was always an issue for when I was working for IRF. There's also the risk when you disconnect hybrid concessions from toll connection, because the concessionaires or the funding needs, how will they be ensured if there is no dedication? But on the other hand, you can see there is a big chance, which we have thanks to the revolution of tolling and satellite tolls. So there are two possibilities. Either you have the new road user charges as a tax, tolls will be alienated. You don't know how much will be affected to networks, or can you keep the link between new road user charges, RAC, if it's more like a price, for example, link it to the existing concessions, you link it also to the free network, the network which has been free of charge until now, or at least you have to make some dedication for the transport network. If road user charges reduce traffic on roads, you need to finance and to offer alternative public transport offer. So this is so far my presentation.
Thank you very much, Ansgar. And we'll move, I think at the end, hopefully you'll have time for some questions and answers. So thanks, and let's move straight to Norbert Schindler, who's the founder and CEO of GNSS Consulting, which specializes in implementing accurate satellite positioning solutions for tolling and telematics. So Norbert, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be in this session. And Ansgar made some very good introductions and mentioned GNSS several times. GNSS stands for Global Navigation Satellite Systems, of which GPS is only one. So whenever anybody talks about GPS, they actually mean GNSS. If you have positioning on in your phone, you can be sure if your phone is less than 10 years old, it has a GNSS receiver that can receive several signals, not only GPS. For us Europeans, the most important one to think about is Galileo, and I will mention that in my presentation. So let me bring you back to my country, Austria, which introduced the first nationwide tolling scheme based on multi-lane free flow. It's based on a technology called DSRC, dedicated short range communication, which is a microwave technology. So for every toll section, you had to build one of these gantries, one of these bridges with the sensors that basically read these the information off of the onboard units, which you see on the left side. These are little battery-powered tags which you mount on the windshield. And that worked quite well for the motorways, and it's still being applied only to trucks, although initially they thought about doing the same for passenger cars, but I think politically nobody wanted to go there. So we have, like in most countries, a vignette that's time-based and not distance-based. Now, if we look at how multi-lane free flow looks in the US, this is a case from New York State. Look at the difference of the infrastructure. It's rather remarkable that the Americans need to have these enormous gantries, whereas in Austria we had a very simple gantry, and here every section that's being tolled has these huge things, which basically have replaced toll plazas. That's certainly a step in the right direction. But in this day and age, we don't need this roadside infrastructure, and I will explain that in my presentation. Germany, for example, whereas Austria launched its multi-lane free flow system 2004 on all the highways, which is about 2,000 kilometers, Germany launched a satellite-based system 1 year later, 2005, without any gantries, but only the virtual gantries, which were in these onboard units, which you see on the top right. These were dashboard-mounted units. They were quite costly. They costed a few €100 at the time. You also had the choice of a DIN slot onboard unit, and the driver couldn't mount them themselves. You basically had to get an appointment at a registered company that a service shop that could mount it for you, connected to the tachograph and so on. But nevertheless, it was very cost effective if you consider that Germany did not have to build these gantries on 12,000 kilometers of motorways like the Austrians did. For the small country of Austria, that made sense, but for Germany already it didn't make sense. So if you have a multi-lane free flow system, of course, you need also an enforcement system. Now, there are also gantries in Germany, but there's 300 of these on the motorways, right? So here you see the different sensors that can read information of the onboard units. You have laser scanners and cameras to make sure that every vehicle is compliant. That means that they either have a functional onboard unit or they have possibly used the manual booking system, which is often an option in many countries, but also other countries have made it mandatory to have an onboard unit since it's rather easy to use nowadays. So this is how the gantries looked back in 2005 in Germany. The same country that built those gantries in Germany has built gantries in Poland, which recently moved to a satellite-based solution. And you can see the gantries are much less busy. There's basically just cameras on those gantries, and it's obviously very cost-effective, much more cost-effective in terms of both in construction and operation, capex and opex. Now, this is what we want to avoid. Now, this is absolutely what we don't want to see, right? Now, as Ansgar showed that diagonal line across Europe, and I'll show you on the map, we still have loads of countries that have loads of toll plazas, and I cannot imagine any of these drivers are happy to stand in these long queues, losing time and money, and don't forget the operational costs of these toll plazas. There's really no excuse to have these kinds of things in operation. And everywhere in the world, people are ripping them away. I hope that we will do that in the rest of Europe also in the very near future. The technology is here to do that. So let's have a look at the landscape in Europe. So I'm a big fan of GNSS, obviously. So you can see the nice blue colored countries are the 8 countries that already have deployed a GNSS-based solution, starting with Switzerland, which was the leader in this area already in 2001. Switzerland was able to introduce a distance-based scheme on all the roads for the trucks above, they started with 12 tons. And then other countries followed suit. Now Switzerland didn't measure the distance by satellite primarily, but the satellite was used as basically a backup to verify the distance measured on the odometers, the tachographs. Slovakia, as I will show in the later slide, was very innovative because they were the first to do the windshield mounted onboard units. And that entered the new era of mandatory onboard units that are simple to acquire and mount on the windshield without any special assistance needed. And we also have 4 more countries that are currently procuring GNSS-based systems. It's worth pointing out that both the Czech Republic and Poland started with microwave systems, and they replaced it with GNSS because GNSS has shown to be far more cost-effective, more flexible. And furthermore, with GNSS, we can use EATS, which I'll describe in a moment. You can see that the new countries here, the 4 countries I've shown, are basically going to rely on EATS. So until now, all the countries that introduced a tolling system had their own solution. You had to go to the local authority, sign up, get your onboard units, and from each country you had to have this procedure, and your windshield was basically cluttered with an onboard unit from every country. And EATS has changed that remarkably, and we'll describe that in a moment. I want to point out in particular the Czech Republic, which moved from DSRC microwave to GNSS. When they with the DNS with the microwave system, they only covered 1,500 kilometers. Those are the roads in green. And then finally, when they changed to GNSS, they could basically double the road network, the toll road network, and that also meant they could cut. Although they doubled the network, they could cut the costs in half, the operational costs. That's quite remarkable. They replaced those, battery-powered tags on the left with the more complex GNSS onboard units on the right, which of course need power, which is why you see this option of the cigarette light. There's also other ways that you can get power to them. So yes, you did have to invest in the onboard units, but you only invested 75 million euros as opposed to hundreds of millions of euros to build all the infrastructure, which in the end was thrown away anyway. So Germany also showed the power of this technology, starting with, as I mentioned, 12,000 kilometers of highways being tolled, which already generated in the very beginning between 4 and 5 billion euros. That's an awful lot of money, which has been used to upkeep the highway network in Germany. If you've ever driven in Germany, you'll appreciate that they do have a very comprehensive and high quality road network. It costs money, and the money comes from the trucks primarily that are paying these fees. Now, from 12,000 kilometers, they decided to go into all the major national roads. Look at that. 52,000 kilometers are now charged using GNSS. It was basically a software update on the onboard unit to get there. So that shows the power of the satellite-based technology. Now the revenues are, of course, much higher, between 7 and 8 billion euros per year. That's money in the bank that the administration can use to upkeep all the roads. And they can also, of course, earmark some of those fees to improve, let's say, other transit networks on rail, for example. So I also want to show that when the Germans expanded the network, what you see here is also one of the national tolled roads going through an urban area. And as Ansgar mentioned, this can be used for congestion pricing, for example, or other ways to control the amount of traffic in urban areas to improve the flow of traffic and also maybe regulate the amount of pollution, congestion, noise, and so on. This is all possible and easily possible using satellite positioning. So how does it work? Basically, you have a tolled vehicle. In this case, we have a picture of a truck, since we have basically in Europe, the trucks affected primarily by this sort of scheme. Each truck is equipped with an onboard unit, which can be put on the windshield. Those onboard units receive signals from the satellites. It's very important to understand that there's no satellite communication, but you have a unit, just like your phone doesn't communicate with satellites. Your phone receives signals from GPS, Galileo, and the others, and from that, it knows its position. This position can be stored on the onboard unit. The onboard unit may or may not do some calculations on the positioning. Lately, it's become the standard that you just basically save the positions and then bundle it and send it through the cellular network, which used to be called GSM. Now we have, 3G, 4G, 5G being introduced. They have different names, but the idea is the same. The data is transmitted to some back office, which is a proxy, an onboard unit, communicates with the server, and somewhere along that chain, the final it's determined where the vehicle's traveled, how much it should be charged. So that's the front end part, the whole box that's in light blue. That data that's gained in the front end is then sent over to the back office system, which does the whole billing. So there's a whole different part which is not really toll related. It's the same like your mobile phone bills. You're registered and you have a customer account and all this stuff. So that's not really tolling technology. That's back office, but every system needs it. So that's the front end part of the tolling, but you also need enforcement. And as I showed earlier, there's some images of what the enforcement gantries can look like. I showed images of the station enforcement, which you see on top. So there's sensors on a gantry that can detect the vehicle passing by, make sure he's compliant, maybe read the license plate, and in case there's a violation, that vehicle can be caught. But you don't have these enforcement gantries on each and every toll section. So you have some mobile enforcement that you can have throughout the entire road network. So in Germany, for example, they have dozens of these vehicles driving around the roads. They could be parked on the side of the road. They could be driving inside the traffic to basically make sure that all the drivers are compliant. And if they're not, they get a penalty. And because of the high cost of penalties, you basically have a very, very high compliance rate on these systems. So, as I mentioned earlier, and also Ansgar mentioned, the European Electronic Toll Service, EETS, has become a real game changer in the world of tolling. Now, instead of having a different onboard unit for each country, you have one single onboard unit that's windshield mounted. We call it plug and play. Opus, for example, are hybrid because they work not only with GNSS, but they also have microwave built inside. For those backward countries like mine, Austria, that still is based on microwave. It will work also in Austria to have that microwave communication. And here's some examples of what these onboard units look like. So these are the three biggest ones. There's more than that. And even though Austria is a microwave country, we still have high-tech companies that are doing these GNSS type of onboard units. And you will see a lot of them now. And in fact, I think Germany has 1/3 of all its users using an EETS onboard unit. Belgium has already 2/3 of all the users using an EETS onboard unit rather than going to the local toll service provider. So it's really changing things. And as Ansgar mentioned, these are now applied for commercial vehicles, for trucks. But we anticipate that the EETS model will also be applied for passenger cars when they are also going to be distance-based charged, which we anticipate in the near future. Let's go into depth what GNSS really means. So there's 4 international global satellite systems, GPS being the most famous one because it was also the first. Then in Europe, we have spent a lot of our taxpayer money on the Galileo system, which is in fact brilliant. It's by far the most robust of all the systems. Then, of course, Beidou is quite recent from China, and GLONASS was something that originated in the Soviet times and has been revised in recent years by the Russian Federation. And what's important is you have multi-constellation. That means you have a GNSS receiver in your onboard unit, also in your mobile phone, which can receive all signals from all these different devices, all these different systems. So that also means that you can mitigate multipath effects in urban canyons. I will have a slide following to show you what that really means. Galileo is the only system that uses signal authentication. That means if anyone tries to spoof the signal, and unfortunately that's happening quite often, we hear reports about that in aviation, for example, where someone uses spoofing and tries to, let's say, confuse airplanes about where they are. The same thing about tolling and onboard units being used. You don't want to necessarily pay, so you can try to spoof your signal. It's illegal, of course, but you can still do it and hope that you get away from paying tolls. So the European Galileo system is not only the most robust and has all these other effects, but is the only civilian-operated GNSS in the world. And a word of caution, the other two on the right, Beidou and GLONASS, are controlled by the armed forces of autocratic regimes, and they may have different interests in mind than making sure we have accurate signals. So one should use caution when using those positioning systems as well. So if you're in an urban canyon, let's say like Singapore, you want to get as many satellites as possible, many signals as possible to get your position. So in the old days, when you had only GPS, that would maybe not be enough to get a good position in a city environment like this one. Nowadays, it's no issue because we have, multiple devices, multiple systems that we can use. Plus, if we use multiple frequencies, we overcome the multipath effect from reflections, as you can see in this image. So we've basically overcome those issues in places like Singapore. Why do I talk about Singapore? Because Singapore is the first country that's going to migrate from a passenger system that's now using microwave DSRC to a satellite-based system. So the first satellite-based system for passenger cars is now being implemented in Singapore. Unfortunately, the company that won the contract from Japan had no previous experience, and they're extremely delayed in the project, but it's underway. On the left, you see the old microwave-based in-vehicle unit, and on the right, the new GNSS-based unit, which is being rolled out right now. Also worth mentioning is Indonesia has decided to replace all of its toll plazas. So that picture of all those cars waiting in line at the toll plaza, they're going to be history in Indonesia because they're going to rip them all down, and it's all going to be satellite-based in Indonesia. That means 50 million users will either use a smartphone app, which won't cost anything, or they can buy a service from a toll service provider that gives them an onboard unit, and they will no longer have to stop and wait at any toll plazas. India plans to do the same, whereas Indonesia is currently implementing this. India is still planning it. They're in the early stages. India is especially interesting, not only because it's the largest country in the world in terms of population, but they build 40 kilometers of highways per day. So that's remarkable. How are they going to finance this if they do not do tolling? Do they want to waste their time building toll plazas? Of course not. So that's why they're planning to replace all the toll plazas on 100,000 kilometers of highways with a GNSS-based solution. That means they're going to move from this big mess here to a very nice, clean road with no need to stop. All that real estate you see on the top, that huge toll plaza, will be gone. You could use that space for rest stations, restaurants, refreshments, whatever. Think of the opportunities you can have by removing those toll plazas. And all those people who are employed, there at the toll plazas, breathing in that awful air from the cars, they can all have nice new jobs in a comfortable restaurant or a service center. So it's not like people are going to be suffering from losing jobs. It will be the largest satellite-based tolling in the system in the world. I have a link for you. You can read up on it. And I also want to point out that the United States is also doing, as Cesar mentioned, the vehicle miles traveled system because of the problem of the fuel tax revenues being dropped, as Ansgar mentioned. So there's already 3 states, Oregon, Utah, and Virginia, that have implemented such schemes for electric vehicles. Basically, there's a simple dongle you can plug into your OBD2 ports. Position accuracy is very low, but that's not so important because you're just counting the kilometers. It's not that critical. But in Europe, we need to really measure the distance more precisely. So that approach won't work. And also the OBD2 ports are not always accessible. The newer generations of electric cars, for example, don't have them. That's the end of my presentation. Merci vielmals, as we say in Switzerland. Since we are virtually in Switzerland, I thought I would throw that in there. And I'm hoping that we get some questions from audience.
Thanks very much, Norbert and Ansgar, for the excellent presentations. Very, very much appreciated.